What if I told you that we have seen one of the nightmare critters before, as far back as before Chapter 3? That's right, while Mob have been revealing the new Poppy Playtime Nightmare critters one by one, the latest critter to be revealed, Po, might have actually been seen before, you just didn't realise it. Welcome horror fans to another Tericho theory, the series that is fueled mostly by crisps these days but is still somehow less calories than Lunchly. Diet theories coming soon. But before we get into the theory, I did receive a mysterious letter from Mob. These have been sent out to a few partners in crime so far, and they seem to be letters from Warrenback Construction, the company in Poppy Playtime that was hired to build this secret underground facility. But each letter contains a secret clue. Viewed under a black light or ultraviolet light, mine has the letters ACCESS highlighted. This spells the word access, and so far others have had central and domain. Central domain access. This definitely smells like an ARG to me. I guess we'll have to wait and see if any more words are revealed. But during the last week, Mob have been showing off the new nightmare critters. These are like the mirrored versions of the smiling critters. While those were generally seen as the good guys, these new characters are shown to have mostly negative traits. Now, in my previous video, I talked about how these new critters could be hinting at the darker parts of Playtime Co. Not only do these new critters share similarities with the old ones, but they could have a hidden meaning that ties into the manipulation of employees and children by Playtime Co. The smiling critters all embody traits Playtime Co wanted, and conversely, these nightmare critters subtly tell their staff and children how to behave. But while we're all trying to figure out if these nightmare critters have a deeper meaning or are just Halloween versions of the toy line, I think Po has a big secret. Remember back to before Chapter 3, there was a long wait between the second chapter and the third. In that time, we got more marketing than ever to fill that void. More ARGs, more teasers, more trailers, more unhinged videos from your favourite bald British theorist. But during that time, we had a bunch of theories as well as some things in the trailers that never seemed to make it into the game. One of the biggest things that never made any sense to me was this picture. This one was found in the teaser trailer for Chapter 3, and it seemed to show what looked like a moth or a bird. In fact, this was before we had the reveal of Catnap, and plenty of people were still theorizing what the main enemy of Chapter 3 would be. Now, when it was revealed that the big purple claw of Chapter 3 belonged to Catnap, most people assumed this drawing was in reference to him. But looking at that picture again, this doesn't really look like Catnap. It doesn't even look like how a child would draw Catnap either. Tell me a kid that draws a cat with wings and where's his tail? Now, taking a look at Po's design, and well, this could have been a bird all along. Po is purple just like Catnap and even has that similar claw shape that we saw before. But this is only my first piece of evidence. You see, that very same trailer had a character that never showed up in Chapter 3. This scene with the pictures of children showed something hiding in the dark. If you look very closely, you can see that something was watching us, but before the shot ends, it moves off quietly into the dark. But once again, this isn't Catnap. Not only is this silhouette completely different, but it once again looks like it has wings. Now let's take a look at Po's description. They like to hide in the dark. Not only do we have a purple winged creature, we now have something that matches its behavior. Now before you type it in the comments, couldn't this have been a tease of Miss Delight? She liked to move in the dark too, so maybe this was her. Well, no, it couldn't have been her. She was locked in the school by Catnap, and we know she's been there since the Hour of Joy. Who, or whatever this is that's moving, is not Miss Delight. So if it's not her and it's not Catnap, then who could it be? But this mystery gets even more mysterious. You see, in the Smiling Critters cartoon, we saw the main cast hiding in fear until Catnap arrived to put them all to sleep. Now, I already talked about the symbolic meaning of this cartoon. The children being so scared of what was happening around them that they actually welcomed Catnap's gas. Also, shout out to this foreshadowing that I never realized until after playing the game. But remember what they were afraid of? A lightning storm. Well, what would you know? Po's pendant is a storm. Could it be that what these smiling critters were really afraid of was Po? It would make sense that the nightmare critters would be seen as the villains in the Smiling Critters cartoon. But what if they were actually scared of a bigger bodies version of Po? One that we actually saw in the teaser for Chapter 3. It could be possible. We already know that an entire segment of the game was cut. We never got to explore the toy store, so perhaps Po was originally supposed to be in Chapter 3 but was pushed back to Chapter 4. In fact, since Po is described as hiding in the dark, perhaps they've been watching us all of this time. But there is another clue in Poe's description that makes me believe we will see them in Chapter 4. They are most comfortable in the dark, but they spend their nights hanging around graveyards. Now of course, this is setting up Poe as the goth or emo type character, but I also think it ties into the teaser trailer for Chapter 4. This is probably the closest thing we have seen to a graveyard in Poppy Playtime yet. All these dead toys stacked on top of each other. Well, I already pointed out in my previous video that over there, hiding in the dark, are a bunch of eyes. These eyes were not only teased on Amber's artwork, but we also saw them on the tease of Dog Day all the way back before Chapter 3. Now up until this point, I haven't really mentioned what animal Poe is. Obviously, Poe is either a crow or a raven. I'll come on to that one shortly. Poe the crow could make sense, it does rhyme, but that in itself could carry a significance. Crows carry heavy symbolism in multiple cultures. You might think that crows are most commonly related to death. Our modern Western culture does like to show crows as a bad omen, but the symbolism of crows actually goes far deeper than that. Crows are carrion birds, they will eat carcasses left over by other animals. Again, this area really does feel like Poe's domain, this looks like their feeding ground. But this behaviour ties into why several cultures have seen crows as symbolic of transformation and rebirth. I wonder how that could tie into Poppy Playtime. This could even tie back into the Bunzo comic. Yes, we saw a bird and an egg, but at the end of that comic we saw Bunzo lying dead with his eyes missing. We also saw plenty of the smiling critters in Chapter 3 had their eyes missing too. It seems like someone's been going around taking all of their eyes out. That sounds like something a carrion bird would do to me. But as I said, it's also possible that Poe is a raven, not a crow. The biggest piece of evidence for this comes from the poem The Raven by none other than Edgar Allan Poe. This one actually makes so much sense. Edgar Allan Poe was an orphan. His father left when he was young and his mother died of tuberculosis. Poe already fits with this description, 2 orphans both named Poe. But Poe the poet was also known as one of the central figures of Gothic fiction, another little link there. But the Raven poem he wrote was often seen as a metaphor for grief. Not only did Poe lose both of his biological parents, he also lost both of his foster parents too, as well as his brother and then later his wife, who was also his much younger cousin. Don't look into it too much. The Raven poem depicts a man who yearns for his lost lover. As he tries to come to terms with his grief, he is tormented by a crow that continually tells him nevermore. As the poem progresses, the man becomes slowly more mad as he falls to his grief.
And his eyes have all the seeming of a demon's that is dreaming. And the lamplight o'er him, streaming, throws his shadow on the floor. And my soul from out that shadow that lies floating on the floor shall be lifted nevermore.
The symbolism is often attributed to the need to remember but the want to forget, the word evermore being used often alongside nevermore. In life, we all face loss, and back then it was much more common. War and disease affected more people then than it does today. But this actually ties back into the themes of poppies in Poppy Playtime. The poppy is also symbolic of tragic loss, the theme there being of the blood spill in World War I. These huge losses in his life influenced Poe to create this poem. It's his own reflection of slowly falling to madness as he loses the loved ones around him. Kind of sounds like Elliot Ludwig in a way. But this symbolism of loss and remembrance heavily ties into what we've seen so far in the games. The orphans lost their families just like Poe did, and many of them also lost their friends in Playtime Co. as well. This continual loss sending Poe slowly mad might just explain why we see so many of the bigger bodies also slowly succumbing to madness. Mommy Longlegs was originally an orphan known as Marie Payne, but by the time we meet her she has definitely been driven mad, which is honestly completely understandable knowing what she's been through. But there might be another huge hint in Edgar Allan Poe's story. I've said several times now that I believe the transfer process originally began as a way to save sick or dying children. This fits with Elliot's mission of bringing joy to as many children as possible, and serves as a reasonable explanation as to why Elliot had the remains of a child in his home. Either that or he was mad too, maybe a little bit of both. He did lose someone in his family too, after all. But the thing that killed several of Edgar's family was a disease, tuberculosis to be specific. Tuberculosis is an infectious disease caused by bacteria. It's airborne and it affects people's lungs. This is something we've had huge hints towards throughout this series. Thomas Clark was diagnosed with lung cancer, something I theorized might have been due to working in a factory surrounded by gas. But we also saw sick beds in Chapter 3, and now we are seeing that the area we are traveling to in Chapter 4 has huge piles of trash and bodies. In Chapter 3 we got a closer look at Playcare. It was built as this giant metal orb underground, which made me theorize that this was essentially a giant bunker, something that could be sealed in case of an emergency, maybe something like a nuclear attack. This would also make sense as we know that Playtime Co.'s orphanage program was running through the Cold War between the United States and Russia, a time where many people were genuinely terrified of a nuclear war. But this underground bunker might have had some huge negative effects that Playtime Co. didn't account for. We've been shown several times now that this area gets no natural sunlight. They tried to dress it up like it did, but this is all false. Well, a lack of sunlight has been shown to affect mental health. This is why night workers are at risk, and we know that most people who are affected by seasonal affective disorder are affected during the winter months when there is less sunlight. Again, this ties into the slow descent of madness that we've talked about, once again hinted at by Poe. But ultraviolet rays from the sun have also been shown to be able to kill viruses and bacteria. You know, I'm a night owl, maybe this is why I'm always getting sick. Mystery solved. Also, I want to point out that we had to use ultraviolet light to reveal these words. Coincidence? All of this combined together paints an incredibly dark picture. Not only were the staff and children in Playtime Co. being slowly driven mad by experiments, loss of their families and friends, being overworked and so on, but this bunker was a hotbed for viruses and disease. The lower levels contained huge piles of rubbish as well as biological remains that were spewing bacteria into the rest of the factory through the ventilation system. This, combined with a lack of sunlight to kill that bacteria, likely meant that these children were getting sick all the time. This probably means that these children lost more friends than we originally thought. And if my hypothesis about the transfer process originally being a way to save sick and dying children is correct, then that could explain why we saw so many more of these living toys than we thought. There were, after all, 1005 experiments before the prototype. I think that Poe the Critter is a huge hint that Playtime Co. was a lot darker than we imagined, both physically and metaphorically. This also adds more weight to the theory of 1006 being Elliot Ludwig. The Hour of Joy really does seem like a last resort to stop more children being brought here to die. An evil act, but one that was deemed necessary. I don't think that Poe being a crow or a raven and named that way is a coincidence. Perhaps it's just a little Easter egg, but considering how dark Edgar's story was, I think this is a huge clue, and it gives us another theme to research that might give us some clues about Chapter 4. But what do you think? Let me know down in the comments below, and as always, thank you very much for watching. I will see you on the next Tericho Theory.